Hello and welcome back to You Are My Boro with myself, Tom Shaw, and Scott Wilson, both of the Northern Echo. We're going to look back on that chaotic afternoon at Elland Road, discuss the many injuries and setbacks that Michael Carrick is currently dealing with. We'll have a brief look ahead to Ipswich on Saturday, although we are going to do another vid and pod at the back end of the week after Michael Carrick's press conference on Thursday, so we can talk about that. If you're watching along on YouTube, then please subscribe. And leave a comment as well if you want anything discussed. And if you listen on your podcast channels, then rate and review there as well. Scott, you're at the Riverside on Saturday. I know we discussed your plantar fascia issue not too long ago, but do you fancy a kickabout?
Boots, yeah. Well, funnily enough, I had a little hour on 7-a-side in the snow last Thursday night, and that was So the foot's all right. The foot's all right. So I tell you what, it's getting towards that, isn't it? I mean, you know, there's been an awful lot of noise up the road about all the injuries Newcastle have had. Well, Boro are running them close. They really are when it comes to injuries. Obviously, suspensions are a big factor this weekend as well on top of that. But it's going to be a bit of a head count for Saturday afternoon, isn't it?
Well, we won't run it along just yet, but we've got a probable team for Saturday's game if everyone who's a doubt doesn't make. So we know Isaiah Jones and Anthony Dijksteel are both obviously suspended. We know certain players like Marcus Forss and Riley McGree, unless they really have made a miraculous recovery in the last week, are going to be out. But then there are several players who are doubts and who Michael Carrick might or might not tell us more about at his press conference on Thursday. Let's have a look back at Leeds. Chaotic. I mean, it was one of them where after 10 minutes into the game, you need to just take a breather. And because there's loads to write about, but you haven't written anything because you haven't had a chance to write about anything.
It's all in front of you. Yeah.
It was one of those bizarre. Even the second half, when there was no goals, still loads happened. Certainly one of the most chaotic games at Elland Road I've ever covered. Well, the most, undoubtedly.
It's the third away game in a row, isn't it, where Boro have conceded 3 goals. Now, you've got to give a little bit of that to the fact that Leeds United are a very good team. You know, they've clicked into gear. They look every inch the promotion candidates we probably all thought they'd be at the start of the season. But it still feels very different to most of what Michael Carrick's Boro was doing last season, which was, yes, they gave an odd goal away, don't get me wrong. And there were games when they relied on Tuber up front to kind of dig them out of it by scoring a goal from nothing or whatever. But even in those games, you generally felt that Boro were the team controlling the game. They were dictating the tempo. You know, right from the word go, Carrick's been all about being possession-based, keeping the ball. So even when they were leaking an odd goal, it still felt like Boro had a pretty good grip or a pretty good control on most of the games they were playing. At the minute, certainly away from home, that's not the case, is it? It's helter-skelter. It's conceding goals in clumps. It's, you know, it's very kind of unlike what I imagine Carrick wants from his Boro side. And a couple of times he's kind of alluded to it, hasn't he? He's basically said, look, we do need to get that control back. You know, it kind of can't go on shipping all of these goals away from home. And that would be the worry. Now, on the flip side, Boro probably created more really good opportunities in a game against Leeds than Leeds will ship up in their next 5. Lath looked a real threat, obviously got his goals, missed his chances, but you know, was a real kind of live wire. And the Boro midfield caused Leeds all kinds of problems at various stages of that game. So going forward, I think Boro are in pretty good shape, you know, assuming they've got everyone there, which we'll get to in a minute. But at the back, it is a worry. And it's going to be even more of a worry this weekend when, you know, like I say, it really is just the last 4 standing that are going to be playing in that back 4. So that, for me, is the worry. Would you agree?
Yeah, because that's not sustainable, is it? Like, I'd seen a couple of discussions afterwards where would you rather play like Michael Carrick's side play and risk losing 3-2, or go and grind out results? Well, I've seen Tony Pulis's Boro draw 0-0 at Elland Road, and obviously we've watched Carrick. I know which team I'd rather watch week in, week out, and we're not paying to watch it. You know, I'd rather be entertained. And Michael Carrick's side undoubtedly do that. That said, there clearly needs to be a balance. I think what the frustrating aspect is, from Saturdays is the goals were avoidable. So the first, when Dan Barlaser cheaply concedes possession, I'd seen Barlaser afterwards saying, you know, Mike, he held his hands up and said, but that's the way the gaffer wants us to play. Now, I get that, but I kind of feel that can't be a cop-out for individual mistakes. So a few minutes earlier, Barlaser had played a pass where he was under no pressure and he'd just given the ball away. And then he did it again a couple of minutes later. Leeds clearly are going to be better than any other team, or better than most other teams at punishing those mistakes. But then the second goal, Bangura gets sucked in, free cross, Dyke Steele gets beat at the far post. Sorry, the third goal. The second goal, Dan James, who's 5'6", out jumps McNair and Bangura at the back post. It feels like, even if you want to play the way Michael Carrick wants to play, which is admirable, you shouldn't be conceding those goals. No. I think what I'm trying to say is I don't think it's a case of saying, well, if Carrick wants to play that way, those goals are going to be conceded. That's not the case. You can play the way Boro want to play, but still not concede those goals.
Yeah, and they did for most of last season. Like I say, even though they were conceding goals last season, it rarely felt like they were conceding goals in just a manic 10-minute spell where any semblance of control of the game went out the window. And that, for me, is what's costing them away from home at the moment. Those crazy 10, 15-minute spells where, for whatever reason, the composure's just not... And that's not about playing attacking, free-flowing football. That's just, for whatever reason, your grip on the game completely disappears for that little spell.
Well, I think Plymouth was it 2 goals in 4 minutes, Bristol City 2 in 9, and Leeds 2 in 5, or something like that. Now, why is that happening? Is that Lenihan being missed at the back? You know, a real leader to get a grip and settle things down. I don't know. I don't know why that.
Yeah.
What the reason is for that? That's one for Carrick.
I mean, it's interesting. You know, it hasn't. You wouldn't automatically think that you take Darragh Lenihan out of a Boro side and all of a sudden the control goes. But you know, it marries up with the minute. It's hard to completely dismiss that suggestion because it's undoubtedly happening since he's not been in the side. You know, is it Howson and Hackney not really playing together or every week? Whereas last season it was pretty much every week Howson and Hackney, they dovetailed really effectively. That central midfield area, you generally felt Boro were running it. We've had Barlaser and Hackney. We've had Howson and Barlaser. Obviously, Hackney's out at the minute. There's been a spell when Howson's been out. Is it that? Maybe. Is it the fact that they're not defending as well from the front anymore? And so, you know, it's not just... It's the fact that the opposition are getting onto the back four that much quicker. It's probably a combination of a lot of different things, isn't it? But it is a worry.
You touched on it there about the away from home, and that's what Michael Carrick said afterwards, because he said it's not a structural issue, because if it was a structural issue, it'd be happening at home as well. At home, Boro have conceded 7 goals in 9. Away from home, Boro have conceded 22 in 10.
It's a staggering.
I don't know why. I don't.
No.
But I think that's an interesting. I think that's an interesting dynamic as well.
Yeah.
You know, the good news from that is the next 2 games are at home, Ipswich and Hull. And I absolutely wouldn't put it past Boro getting 6 points from those games, as difficult as they are.
I mean, maybe it's partly a thing that, in general, teams that come to the Riverside let Boro have a fair bit amount of the ball. And so, you know, Boro can then start to dictate the tempo. They can settle themselves into the game. They can you know, they can gain that sense of control gradually. Away from home, when teams are more likely to get at Boro, it just feels like they can't get out of that being on the back foot and kind of being reactive rather than proactive.
And you know, Carrick was clearly keen to talk about this after the game on Saturday. For all we've spent 5 or 6 minutes discussing that issue, to lose 3-2 and to go and to really come away from Elland Road thinking we should have got something from that. That's their 7th league win in a row. Boro clearly aren't far away at all. And that's the positive Carrick will understandably take, isn't it? With all the players out, with a team out now, with an 11 out, basically, other than you go, because over 10 of your outfield team out. we've gone to probably the hardest place to go in the Championship at the minute. And we're coming away thinking we should have got something from that game. That's what Carrick will take from it, I would imagine, while clearly addressing those issues we've discussed. He will be the point of that.
And that's why I think at the moment you can't go too far over the top about the kind of defensive concerns, because at the other end of the pitch, they look a real threat. Like you say, you know, with so many players out, and you know, as we've said on the last vid, I think players who would be nailed on in your first choice starting 11. You know, we're not talking about a couple of fringe players, a couple of kids here, and a couple of first teamers. No, we're talking everyone really is a nailed on first team player. You know, the players who have stepped in have done exceptionally well, and you know, that they're other than you know, defensively, there hasn't been a really marked drop off, and that's got to be a major positive for Carrick, because if and when these players do come back, then all of a sudden, you know, the strength of that squad now looks great. But obviously, they've just got to get to that point, haven't they? They've got to get to the point where the players are going to start to return.
And Lath's 2 goals. It's funny because I was asked Michael Carrick about Lath at his press conference last week. Kind of words to the effect of, you can see what he's good at, but he's very raw and unpredictable and a little bit wild at times. But if you coached him too much, would you risk not coached him too much? But could you coach that unpredictability out of him? Is there a balance to be struck there? And I think we saw the good and the bad of him really on Saturday, because he scored 2 great goals, but then missed 3 glorious chances. I think for now, while he's a work in progress and while he's getting used to the Championship, that's kind of going to be what you've got to expect from him, I think, haven't you?
Yeah, and I mean, there are players that are just like that, aren't there? You know, there are players. I mean, I watched that Arsenal game last night, and Gabriel Jesus scored a great goal. But then he for me is a classic player where he could then in the next game miss 3 absolute sitters. But there's other parts of his game that are really good, and he'll give you a lot for. You know, Adama Traore, great example. Nobody's really been able to iron out the flaws that are evidently there in his game. So does there come a point where you just have to say, we have to accentuate the positives and just accept that there'll be elements of his game that aren't quite where we want them. Now, listen, it's way too early to say that with Lath. He's still acclimatizing to England. He's still getting used to the Championship, etc., etc. But, you know, on all the evidence so far, he looks a player who is not necessarily going to be relied upon to get you 20 goals a season and convert 50% of his chances or whatever. But he's always going to be a massive threat. He's going to cause defenders all kinds of problems. His pace is just going to get him into positions that other centre forwards wouldn't be able to get into anyway. And he's going to create pockets of space for other players to exploit in that 18-yard box. So, you know, I think certainly for the moment, you probably just got to accept and take the kind of rough with the smooth. And time will tell whether that's always going to be the case or not.
I think if you're a defender, an opposition defender, whether it's Josh Coburn or Lath, you're not going to enjoy playing against either, really, are you? Because Coburn's going to rough you up and make life difficult for you that way. And then Lath's got the movement and pace to not give you a moment's peace. And then when you look elsewhere across the Boro front line, Morgan Rogers, I thought was decent at Leeds, and he continues to get better with every game. The frustration with Isaiah Jones, obviously that was the last game before the yellow card cut off. So to get his 5th yellow was frustrating, because he was a real threat on the counter, and his run for Silvera's chance when Silvera hits the post was excellent. And then obviously Greenwood's back on Saturday as well. Let's discuss that team on Saturday then. Now, if everyone who's a doubt is missing, this is what the team...
We've gone with this as a best guess of what you might line up with if everybody is out. So that's with obviously Dijksteel and Jones suspended. We know the long-termers, so no McGree, no Force, no O'Brien, no Lenihan. And then also no Fry, no Hackney, no McNair.
Anyone,
which is quite likely then.
So I mean, you know, we might find out more. There might, you know, it might be that one of them is closer than we know, but this is just on the off chance.
Let's read it out for our podcasters, because I've just realised that it's going along the screen there on the old YouTube version. But if you're podcasting, you'll be thinking, what on earth are they going on about?
They'll be thinking that anyway, to be fair.
They will. They will.
Dieng, Howson, Vandenberg, Clark, Engel, Barlaser, Crooks, Silvera, Rogers, Greenwood, Latte-Lath.
Yeah.
We'll start with that back line. Johnny Howson's played there before. Well, he's played everywhere before, but he played right back and right centre half and right wing back under Woodgate, and I think he played there a little bit under Wilder and Warnock as well. It feels like the safest option, really, at right back, doesn't it?
I don't think that back line looks awful. You're asking probably quite a lot of Matt Clark, given how long he's been out for. Howson at right back wouldn't worry me at all. I mean, clearly you're not going to get the rampage and forward runs. You're not going to get the overlapping. But in terms of a fill-in right back who will do a defensive job and put a shift in, Johnny Howson is absolutely more than capable at that. Engel at left back, well, he's probably Burrow's first choice left back now. That's fine. Vandenberg, you know, I think we've said all the way through on these vids, looks like he'll be a centre-half in the long run and probably, you know, it might even be better at centre-half now. So for me, it's only Clark and quite how sharp he's going to be against, let's be honest, an Ipswich attack that is right up there in terms of threat in the league. You know, Broadhead, Chaplin, Hurst. You know, you're not going to get many stiffer examinations than this Ipswich attack. Certainly the front three. It's how Clark stands up to that I think is the question.
What I would say about Clark is obviously he comes on at Leeds and gives the penalty away straight away, less than a minute or so, and played it. And you kind of think, well, you know, understandably rusty. You can't blame him there. He's played what, a matter of minutes in 12, 13, 14 months. But after that, I thought he did really well. I thought he was really solid, which is testament to his approach, to his mentality, I think, to come into a game like that, but also his fitness, having not played. But clearly, it is a big test for someone making the first start against a team playing as well as Ipswich. In the midfield, this is obviously if Hackney's missing and Howson goes back to the defence. Barlaser, and I'm thinking, who would he play alongside Barlaser? And then obviously Matt Crooks played most of his football in centre midfield before Carrick came in. It's not ideal given Crooks has played most of his football at number 10 this year, but they are two players who know each other well, having played together at Rotherham as well, which I think would be another factor.
Yeah, I think if you've got to move Howson in the back line and you don't want to completely change formation, which is obviously the wild card here, that Carrick could all of a sudden pull a rabbit from a hat and go three at the back or whatever and completely change formation. If you want to stick with the same formation, I think it has to be Matt Crooks, because all your other options, you know, you could play Rogers there, you could play Greenwood there and play Bangura wide on the left, or, you know, ahead of Engel. But I think all of those options, the balance against a side who are so good at the counter-attack as Ipswich are, just isn't right. You know, I think that would leave you far too wide open. Whereas at least with Crooks, like you say, he's got experience of the role. You know, there's a physicality to him that means he can slot in there without too many problems. You know, he's positionally aware enough that he'll sit deep and slot in when he needs to. I think he would have to be the answer if like we say, Howson is going in the back four.
And if Crooks didn't have to drop into midfield, you would imagine that the three behind the attacker would be Rogers, Greenwood, who's available again, and Crooks behind the striker. But obviously, if Crooks goes back into midfield, you're imagining Rogers and Greenwood will be in there. Jones is suspended. Silvera?
I think if the Howson and Crooks moves as we are, then I think the decision is either Silvera or, like I say, Bangura as a wide, you know, wide left, yeah, which, you know, he could play there, couldn't he? Let's be honest. He spends most of his time there when he's playing at fullback. So I think it will be a toss-up between them. I mean, Silvera's had some good games in the Cup, in the Carabao Cup. Go back to that second half at Exeter where he was absolutely superb. So, you know, I think if this was to be the kind of way that Carrick went and he did go Bangura ahead of Silvera, then I think Silvera would probably have a right to think, that's a bit harsh on me, that. You know, he couldn't have done much more in the opportunities he's had. So I think he would be worth the shout from the start.
If someone had assured that team running across the bottom 2 months ago, they'd have thought, what on earth's gone on here? Yeah. If they'd just seen probable 11. and not known anything else. It is a remarkable turn of events, really, over the last few.
I mean, we're playing a complete guessing game here, but what's your gut thoughts on Fry, McNair, and Hackney? Whether any of them will have a chance. Now, listen, as I say, we're recording this. Michael Carrick's up tomorrow. He might give us a definitive one way or not. He might well not give a definitive either way. But what's your gut thought on that?
Carrick said of Fry and Hackney last week that words to the effect of neither of them were particularly close. That suggests to me that I think I'd be more surprised if either of them were back on Saturday. McNair, it's impossible to know, isn't it? I mean, a back injury, he was forced off straight away, which suggests, it's not like he was able to continue, but struggled on a little bit. So again, you would look at that and probably feel.
I guess the only thing I would say is if Fry or Hackney are training, then because you're so light, because you've got so many players out, you'd probably be more inclined to say, look, can you just give us a go here because we really could do with you? Then maybe
the risk there is, I think, hamstring.
The risk obvious. Yeah, the risk obvious that you rule them out with the entire Christmas program and everything. But it's an interesting one, isn't it?
I think McNair is, and again, clearly we might be way off with this. It's a pure guessing game. I think McNair is probably most likely. In which case, you probably play McNair at centre half, with Clark,
Vandenberg right back,
and the rest.
House back in the midfield. Crook stays where he is.
But yeah, it will be interesting to see whether we can take anything from what, because I know we joke about it. Clearly, Carrick doesn't like giving a lot away injury and selection wise, which is fair enough. But it'll be interesting to see if you can take anything from what he says.
Yeah, it will
on Thursday. You've been busy the last few days because development's up the road.
Yes.
Tony Mowbray sacked. What's the story there then? For those who, for Boro fans who kind of just take clearly a passing interest in what.
Yeah, I think understandably, if you're looking at this from the outside, the view is what an absolutely ridiculous state of events. What on earth's gone on there? Who does Sunderland think they are? He got them to the playoffs last season. He's got them 9th in the league at the minute, obviously above Boro, 3 points off the playoffs. How on earth he lost his job? And I don't disagree with any of that, really, by the way. The context behind it, though, and this is where, when managers leave or lose their jobs, there's often more going on, isn't there, behind the scenes? And if you're not following that club day to day, you don't really know. Well, so last April time, stories started to emerge that Sunderland were potentially looking for a new head coach. An Italian guy called Francesco Farioli, who's now manager of Nice, he was quite strongly linked with them, and the club basically had to concede privately that yes, there was a bit of sounding out going on, but it was just progression planning. It's what every club should be doing, get something in place, etc. But Mowbray clearly got wind of that, wasn't massively happy about that. And this is in in a context of, and we're almost going back to the old Boro days here, where recruitment has become a real issue there. So Mowbray has effectively no say whatsoever in recruitment. Christian Speakman, the sporting director, presents him with the players. He gets on and coaches them. And that's clearly been a simmering issue. When they lost to Luton in the playoff semi-final last season, I interviewed Mogger under the kind, well, it was a bar that was reconstituted into a press room at Luton Town, which probably tells you all you need to know about Kenilworth Road. And he was basically saying, look, I don't know if I'm going to be here next season. Yes, I'd like to be, but the club's the club. Football clubs have all the power now. It just felt like somebody who knew he was potentially on rocky ground. And that's kind of simmered along this season. There's been a truce. But again, Mowbray didn't really get what he wanted in the summer. And it was telling after the game last weekend, but Sunderland rather drew at Millwall last weekend, and Mowbray kind of came out and said, look, in an ideal world, I'd like to do things differently, but I'm being told to play these young kids. That's my job, to develop and play these young kids. We might not win games if we're doing that. I'm paraphrasing there, but that was effectively what. And when you're reading those quotes, when you're hearing those quotes, you're thinking, right, the writing feels like it's on the wall here. So while it was still a bit of a surprise when it happened at 10 o'clock on Monday night, just as I was settling down in front of the TV with a nice cup of tea and a mince pie and just settling in, and all of a sudden wallop, it wasn't completely out the blue if you'd been following Sunderland over the last kind of 6-9 months. I still think it's a really, really harsh decision. And I think, for me, it's the wrong decision. You know, Sunderland now need to work out what they want to be. Do they want to be a club that develops and brings through young players and signs nothing other than young players? Or do they want to be a club that wins promotion? Because while you can do the two things at once, it's really, really hard.
And with that backdrop, the job is done, really, with the added complication of not having a recognised striker for the second half of last season, and having 4, but not getting a single goal from any of them in the first 4 months.
Which is an incredible stat, isn't it? 4 strikers Sunderland signed in the summer. They've all played to varying degrees. Not one of them has scored.
So I think the job was done while nurturing that talent in the way he has done. I've said a few times, I think Mowbray has been the ideal head coach for that team, really, over the last year or so. What I think's interesting from a Boro point of view is if you look at that table at the minute, Leicester and Ipswich look pretty set for top 6, clearly. It's going to take a disaster there for any of them to drop out the top 6. I think you'd say the same for Leeds. Yeah. Southampton have found the feet now. West Brom looks solid. But then there's a 6th spot where, now clearly I'm not saying that those 5 are nailed on, but those 5 look strong. Then there's a 6th spot, and I think Hull, Boro, Sunderland, Preston have fallen away. But there's various teams who will look at that last spot and think that's right up for grabs. I was looking at it last week and thinking, I think you'd make a case that Sunderland are potentially Boro's biggest rivals for that 6th spot. So from that perspective, who comes in and how he fares is clearly going to be of interest to Boro have to look after themselves. But you get what I'm saying.
No, absolutely. I mean, yeah, will this change make Sunderland stronger? In which case they have to have a massive chance of finishing in the top 6, or will it weaken them? In which case, you know, it won't take a lot for them to drop away and be mid-table to top of the bottom half. So, no, it's going to be very, very interesting. I mean, it's early days. We haven't really had any firm guidance yet, but all the noises, all the suggestions seems to be that it's probably going to be an overseas-based coach. It'll certainly be a much younger coach than Mowbray. It'll be a head coach. It'll be someone who's starting to get a bit of a reputation for developing young players, you know, all that side of things. I mean, I joked on Twitter the other night that I better start brushing up on 36-year-olds in Bundesliga B who know all about XG and inverted fullbacks, but it feels like that kind of an appointment is where they're heading. So that's going to be really, really interesting. The last thing I'd say on Mowbray is it feels like he's been dealt a really harsh hand at both Boro and Sunderland now, doesn't it? You look back at that Boro spell, and you know, you look at the teams he was having to put out there, and you kind of think, well, what on earth was he meant to do with it? And yet, in hindsight, you look back now and think, well, a lot of the building blocks for that Karanka promotion team were put in place by Mowbray, weren't they? And you do wonder if either at Sunderland or some of the players that he's helped to bring through at Sunderland now, I think you might look at them in 5 or 6 years' time and say, God, wasn't their career massively helped by that spell they had under Mowbray? Jack Clark, Dan Neil, Pierre Ekwe, you know, they could either really do it at Sunderland and be part of something good there, or they could end up playing in the Premier League. And I think a lot of that is the way that Mowbray has helped develop them over the last, 15 months.
I've said it a few times that managers often talk about wanting to leave clubs in a better position than when they came in. But really, if we're honest, managers have got to be selfish because they've got to look after themselves. And what they really care about is clearly the results for the here and now. I think if you look back at Mowbray's career, every club he's left on such solid, sound foundations for them to go on and achieve success. He at Boro, clearly the players who he brought in and laid the foundations for what followed. I think the same is obviously at Sunderland now. Blackburn, you think of the state Blackburn were in when Mowbray went in there. You know, he didn't manage to keep them up, but he got them back up and nurtured all that young talent. Coventry was fighting fires that when he was there, wasn't he? But you look at the young players he brought through. I don't know what the future holds for Mowbray, but he's still got a lot to offer.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean,
absolutely got a lot to offer.
Is the irony of the whole situation is that Sunderland seem to want someone who can develop young players. I don't think there's a better manager in the entire football league for bringing through and developing young players than Mowbray. That's the ridiculousness of the situation for me. So I think there'll be job offers for him. It's whether he wants them or not, isn't it? I mean, part of the big thing about the Sunderland job was the fact that he was able to live back at home, be back with his family, see a bit of his lads as they're getting older. You know, we all know about one of his sons who's the Boro season ticket holder and all of that. I could be wrong. Managers are funny characters, aren't they? I'd be really surprised if Tony Mowbray decided he was going to take a job at Ipswich or Norwich or somewhere in London, or just purely for the geography. I think he's got to a stage in his career now where he doesn't need that.
Swansea got rid of their manager Mike Duff at the weekend as well, which was interesting. I think I won't go into it. We won't go into depth. But in the owner's comments, he talked about how they'd maybe gone away from the Swansea way with the appointment, which I think is an indicator of where they might be going next. And I read that although Nathan Jones is a favourite with the bookies as things stand, and clearly these things can change very quickly. Wales Online are saying that he's not a candidate. And is it Barry Murphy, the
oh yes.
Manchester City number 2, who's I think second favourite, and Man United. Let me have a look. So I was just looking before we started.
Yeah.
Eric Ramsey from Man United is hotly tipped as well. So it'll be interesting to see, because obviously Boro are there a week on Saturday, and I think I'm right in saying that's Swansea's next home game, and that's still what 8, 9, 10 days away. There's every chance they've got
to be there. It's interesting, isn't it? Because we've seen Chris Wilder go back in at Sheffield United this week, and yet a number of the general mood in the Championship, kind of finally, if you like, seems to be moving away from that Warnock, Mick McCarthy, that generation, that style of manager. Now, Wilder going back into Sheffield United is probably a bit of an outlier, and but it does kind of feel like most Championship clubs now are wanting to get a Michael Carrick type figure, aren't they? Rather than a Warnock or a Wilder who Boro obviously let go.
Yeah, because you look at the success of Kieran McKenna as well, which we'll talk about.
Great example, yeah.
I think both Carrick and McKenna, and they're not the only examples, which makes it interesting for someone like Nathan Jones, isn't it? Who I read had turned down the Rotherham job.
Yeah.
Which is obviously that vacancy still available as well. Yeah, we're certainly into that. Normally it's October rather than November and December when
it's a bit later now. It's a bit later this time, isn't it? But it's arrived. Yeah, it's come eventually.
And it'll be interesting to see how.
Very last one, because I realise we're the time's racing away. Was what about the cup draw? What do you think?
Boro Villa. I think it's a good draw because it's an occasion and it's an opportunity to test yourselves. The risk is you get a kind of sobering experience like you got last season against Brighton. And I think given the current situation, Michael Carrick clearly, I know we're a month down the line, but Carrick clearly might want to tinker with his squad and play some of those on the fringes. But it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to test yourself, isn't it? And for all, I think you'd prefer the type of draws Boro have had in the Carabao Cup this season, the lower league teams, and give you the opportunity to go deep. There is an occasion when a proper club, a big club like Villa come to town, they'll bring a big following. Clearly a top Premier League team going for Champions League this season. So I think it's exciting. I'm looking forward to it. I have a feeling in terms of North East Cup ties, it might get slightly overshadowed that weekend, but
I think it probably will. Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting dynamic with Boro in the Cup is obviously, we would all like to think that just literally round the corner from that is a 2-legged Carabao Cup semi-final. Yeah. So, I think if Boro beat Port Vale, then I'm not saying the FA Cup becomes less important, but it's very hard for a Championship club to seriously fight on 3 fronts. Yeah. And I think if you're in a League Cup semi-final, then clearly that has to be a massive priority for that kind of late January spell. So yeah, I wonder if drawing listen, you don't want to go out of anything, and I'm not saying that at all. Boro could quite easily beat Villa, but I think it's probably a better draw than kind of getting an awkward championship team away, and you know what I mean.
I think the worst kind of cup draw is a team from your own league away.
Yeah, agreed.
Obviously, maybe not like if you get the quarters and you think, well,
no, it's different then. It's different then, but early on. Yeah.
I think you want a kind of, a low league tie, which is an opportunity to get through, a non-league story, or a big Premier League club, and I think Villa clearly tick that box. I think it'll be good. I'm looking forward to that.
Good.
But first, we've got Michael Carrick's press conference on Thursday to look forward to, where I'm sure he'll be asked about injuries, and then we'll be back early on Friday morning to discuss what was said and to look ahead to his reunion with Kieran McKenna on Saturday as Boro play high fly in Ipswich. So join us then. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again later in the week.